Start of second half hour, Gr12, choice 1 and choice 2, 30th of July.
Bonga, when we have our sessions later in the day, just call them like 5th half hour, and 6th half hour, and 75th half hour, and that. Okay. Dated between 1.9 and 0.3 million years ago, much taller than previous hominids, and these are known as the first hominids to use fire. So they used and controlled fire, and that's important. Okay. Please don't obsess about this. If anything, you're allowed to forget this one. Some paleoanthropologists they talk about Homo erectus as not being one group but two groups, and they divide it into Homo ergaster and Homo erectus. Okay, and they think that the ergaster fossils are the individuals that actually left Africa. So slightly larger than modern humans, larger brain, 800 to 1,100. So what you can see is that the brain is getting bigger. Okay, the skull, the teeth, and the skeleton, similar to modern humans. Long, low cranium. Strongly receding forehead, and what does this say? So receding means sloping backwards, not a very big frontal lobe. And a jaw without an obvious chin. And this is going to become important. We've spoken about this as being a chin is evidence of, an obvious chin is evidence of speech. Okay, so the example, the famous example of Homo erectus is Turkana boy. And Turkana boy was found at Lake Turkana in Kenya. A 9 to 10-year-old boy, 1.60 centimeters tall, in other words, as tall as I am. Okay? I mean, as short as I am. Okay? But because he was young, they looked at it and they predicted that if he had grown to adulthood, he would have reached 182, which is quite tall. Ruth, how tall are you?
180.
Oh, like as tall as Ruth, that's tall. Okay. Brain size, 880 cubic centimeters, but they think that it would have been about 910 at adulthood. Adult, modern human, about 1,350. Okay, so the brain is getting bigger. All right, so they think that this is the kind of environment in which Homo erectus would have lived. So made tools, made fires, controlled fires, and had shelters. Okay, there's a Homo erectus skull, and we have a Homo erectus skull here. Well, no, not a Homo erectus skull. A thing of a Homo erectus skull. So quite big brow ridges. Not such big protruding jaws as the other ones. And you can see, because the foramen magnum is right underneath the center of the skull, so you can see fully bipedal. Okay, right, happy with it. Okay. All right. Not such huge teeth as the other ones. So you can just look at all the different hominid skulls. I'll put this in just so that you can have it as a glance. So Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo floresiensis. We'll talk about that briefly, and there's good old Homo naledi. So this is a really interesting find. These guys were found on an island off of Indonesia. And they're really, really tiny. And it is thought that they might be tiny because they lived in caves. Okay, but you don't have to know about those, it's just for interest. And there you can see the transition. So Australopithecans, Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalensis, and Homo sapiens. They had a bigger brain than we do. Okay. All right. So this is looking at them comparatively. So Australopithecines, Homo erectus, and Homo sapiens. And this is the first one that has that little nice protruding chin. Because if you look at this one, it recedes, and if you look at this one, it also recedes. So remember I said to you that this means that there's enough space here to produce a tongue that's got all the correct muscles for making speech sounds. So although they could make sounds, they couldn't do words. Okay, all right. Homo erectus, okay. You need to be able to know how to interpret these diagrams and write some stuff about them. Okay. Then there's a Homo individual that you do not have to know about, called Homo heidelbergensis, first found in Germany. And certain people hypothesize. So the evolutionary line between Homo erectus and Homo sapiens is not clear. And it seems that Homo erectus evolved into Homo heidelbergensis. So Homo erectus evolved into Homo heidelbergensis, and Homo heidelbergensis, it is hypothesized, evolved into two different lines. So evolved into Homo sapiens, and this line was archaic Homo sapiens, followed by modern Homo sapiens, and this line was the Neanderthals. Okay, so that's just a hypothesis. Okay, do not obsessively learn this one. Okay, Neanderthals appeared approximately 230,000 years ago, lived during the ice ages. They were extremely well adapted to living in cold climates, larger than modern humans, which is why they had a bigger skull. Okay, so their brain was bigger, just like an elephant's brain is bigger than our brain. Because an elephant is bigger than we are, doesn't mean that it had all the areas that are required for really modern development, like logical thought, etc. So this is a Neanderthal, and this is a human. I should have swapped those labels around just to make it quite clear. Okay, so you can see features of this one that say that it's slightly more primitive than modern Homo sapiens. A little bit more of brow ridge than we have. Not as well developed frontal region. Okay. Okay.
And the chin?
No. 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 I think it's a bit dicey, hey? I'm okay with them having made sounds. No, because look, our chin sticks out a little bit.
Yeah.
But you do know that humans and Neanderthals bred. They did exist at the same time in the same areas, and in fact Homo sapiens displaced Neanderthals. But there's very good evidence of interbreeding, and there is a lot of Neanderthal DNA in modern humans.
Especially like, isn't it like UK, Scandinavian kind of?
Yes, because that's where the Neanderthals were, up in Europe. And so there was breeding there, which sort of brings into question, were they different species? Because remember, the definition of a species is able to interbreed and produce fertile offspring. So if they were able to breed, and there's evidence of their DNA in human DNA, were they actually a different species? According to the definition of species, they weren't a different species. But anyway, okay, just a nice thing to think about.
Do you think they knew they were different from each other back then? Like if they were walking around in like the forest and they saw another, they saw like a Neanderthal, they would be like, oh, Neanderthal.
ancestors of humans kill each other?
Would ancestors of humans kill humans?
Not humans, like other humanoids.
So like Neanderthals?
Yeah, well, yeah, and before that.
Yes, I would say so.
Okay.
Because you know what humans are like.
Just because, or because
I think the majority of conflict comes in
territory?
my hypothesis. As soon as there's a food and space becomes a limiting factor. But I don't think there's anybody who can tell you that for definite. So what they would need to do is look at like scars on fossils of other types of hominids, because those scars on the bones would say indicate maybe it was killed by a spear or something like that. But I'm not sure that they would know. I have no idea. I've never read anything like that. However, why would humans be able to displace Neanderthals if they weren't aggressive towards them? Bearing in mind that Neanderthals were bulkier than they were.
Just smarter. That's what
Okay. Here's a little video to watch if you're interested. So, skeletons of Neanderthals were found first in Germany's Neander Valley. Okay, well, that's why they're Neanderthals. They had massive brow ridges, protruding noses, jaws and teeth, smaller forebrain, language not well developed. What that means, who knows. Heavily muscled, culturally advanced, and this starts to become an issue in the hominid thing, the hominid story of this. They manufactured a variety of simple tools. They were considered a side branch of human evolution, and there is evidence that they did interbreed. Brain, 1,500, bigger than ours, larger than the average modern human, averaged 3.3 pounds, okay, which is just over a kilogram. But they were heavier, they were more muscular. They used skins to keep warm, they made fires, they made tools, etc., etc. There are some tools, but really quite interesting, they produced the first glue. Don't write this, don't learn it. Okay, what they did was they took bark from birch trees and they extracted, they burnt this bark and they were able to extract tar from the bark. And then what they did was they were able to glue little points like this to a shaft to be able to make a spear. So they were the first people who didn't tie them, they actually glued them. And they buried their dead with spices and bedding. This is interesting, because this is the first indication of a group of individuals that maybe had a belief that there was an afterlife, or that there was a divine being. Okay, so this is the first evidence of that kind of thing. And there is evidence that they had burial ceremonies. Okay, but don't obsessively learn that. They built quite sturdy huts, and they made little flutes of bones. Okay, so this is not the only example. There are quite a few examples of little musical instruments that they made, a flute-like thing. Now this is very interesting. There was a time period in Africa, and possibly in Europe as well, where there was an incredible shortage of water, an incredible drought. And the only individuals that survived lived, because there was very little vegetation, very little food, etc. on the continent. And so a lot of them lived in caves along the coast. And they survived by eating mussels, which they harvested from the rocks. And there's lots of, do you guys know what a midden is? It's like a rubbish heap. Okay, a rubbish heap. So there are lots of mussel shells on the middens near these caves, which is evidence that the individuals ate a lot of mussels. Mussels are very rich in omega-3, and the argument is that this diet contributed to an increase in brain size. Okay. All right, so there's evidence of burial ceremonies. I'm not 100% sure that people bought bouquets of flowers, but there we have it. Okay. Just looking at the cranium. Okay, so I think this is a bit of a distorted picture because I've yet to see a human that's got an alien type going there, but anyway, just shows bigger, more vertical frontal bone and a bit of a receding slope backwards frontal bone and quite big brow ridges. Okay, so there on a, why is this a bar graph and not a histogram? Mumble, 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 bongo, go.
You want to lower it at the same time?
Oh no, no. So you remember that a bar graph is the one that's got spaces between the columns, because when you look through the window, through burglar bars, there's spaces between burglar bars. So a bar graph has spaces. Okay. Histogram, the columns are next to each other. And the defining point, and you have to know this, is these categories are not continuous. So if I say to you, Monday, you say? Good, Tuesday, okay. Next person will say Wednesday. So it doesn't matter where you are in the world, everyone says Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, unless they're Renana. If I say to you chimpanzee, yeah, exactly. You're not going to say Australopithecus africanus. Okay, right. Unless you're in my bio class, and then you would. Okay, so these categories are not continuous. And because they're discontinuous, they've got to have spaces between them. Okay, so a bar graph, not a histogram, not a line graph, which also requires continuous data. So just showing the size of the brains. Please don't.
What is on the y-axis?
Cubic centimeters of brain size.
Oh,
Okay. All right. And remember, y-axis scale all of their figures on the x-axis. They've got to be at consistent spacing, and you need to put tick marks where the figures are. So these little things, I call a tick mark. You have to put tick marks there. Okay, right. New find. September 2013. Hominid, also found in the cradle of humankind, and it was also a Lee Berger thing. Okay, so named after the Dinaledi chamber system, cave system. Naledi means star in Setswana, and there are a number of reasons why these ones are absolutely unique. Okay. This is a side branch. Don't obsessively learn it as being along the line. About 1.5 meters tall. Tiny brain, slightly larger than an orange. So this is really tiny for a Homo. Okay. So that's as small as the smallest Australopithecans. But they had a cranial shape that is like that of the Homo. And they're a very patchy organism that is like, this part is a bit like a Homo sapiens, but that part is like an Australopithecine, and this is like a Homo, and that's like, and this, so this is quite interesting. Because from midway down the arm right through to the wrist and the palm of the hand looks exactly like a human. Thumb is unique and long. Hand itself is approximately proportioned like a human, but the phalanges and the fingers, in other words, the feet phalanges and the fingers are very, very curved. And remember I said to you yesterday that that is an indication of climbing. Okay, so curved that the only creature that we have with curvature like that are 4 or 5 million old primitive members of hominids. There's an article There's a hypothetical, that's where Homo naledi might be able to fit in. Some people think it's the earliest Homo species. Okay. And remember, the really nice story is, there's the Rising Star cave system, and remember that they were found here, with these two little areas that had to be crawled through, less than 10 inches high. In other words, so your normal ruler is a 12-inch ruler, so it is 2 thumbs short of that. So if you hold your long ruler up, 2 thumbs short of that, that's how the little thing that the people had to climb through. So,
How can you fit?
so what they did was, and
Like my head won't even like.
do you remember this? No.
When it have the fine, I remember it.
So remember that everything about this kind of thing is always kept very, very, very secret until the day that it is announced. Okay, and what they did was they advertised for very tiny women. Okay, and they got a group of really, really tiny little skinny girls, young women, who could go through here. And what they did was they had electricity and they had computers and lights down here, and they worked here and communicated with the guys at the top here. Now, they weren't all paleontologists, were they?
They were.
Were they?
Well, some of them, they're from America and I think Sweden. And
Yeah.
they communicate on Facebook with Lee Berger and put up the message, I need help.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so these little tiny, tiny people. Anyway, so what is very interesting is that they found lots of specimens in this chamber. So I'm not saying individuals, I'm saying pieces of bone. 1,550 specimens in all, 15 individuals, skulls, jaws, ribs, teeth, and one nearly complete foot, even any ear bones. Okay. Parts look very, very modern, parts very primitive, even more ape-like than Australopithecines. Okay, right, so there we go. This is the outline, the faint outline is the size of a human skull, and this is their brain inside of a human skull. So male Homo naledi, brain size 560 cubic centimeters, very tiny. Very interesting hands, very interesting feet, very modern feet. Because look, the toes are all parallel to each other, and the big toe much more robust than the others. Okay, right. But unusually wide pelvic blades. So the pelvis isn't a basin shaped, it's very flaring like that, which is unusual. Okay. All right, and that's what it looked like. Don't go and obsessively learn this, just know it existed. Okay. All right. So we need to just briefly talk about culture and art and stuff. Yes.
Why would they not say Homo naledi was a transitional fossil species? Because if it had characteristics of both.
Because I think because of the time period in which it existed. So Lee Berger, with all respect in the world, is very into publicity.
Yeah.
And he pushes ideas that he has, which maybe not necessarily all researchers in the world have the same ideas. That being said, we've already spoken about the fact that people in the UK hate the fact that origins of humankind were from Africa. So there's a lot of competition between scientists. Because remember, the person who publishes first in a scientific journal is the one who gets all the funding. So there are a lot of people. Lee Berger is very In terms of his personality, he's not necessarily well liked within the community of paleontologists. They say he's arrogant. I don't know the man. Okay? So there are a lot of people who would go, just because Lieberger says something, I'm going to say the opposite. I don't know. What do you think?
I'm sure on neurons, I have to check, but there's some video clips and I've got one of them. I'm just checking if on there, I can't remember. And then also about how he brought the team together and went down, and he's very, he's like, you know, it's in your face.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's quite nice to watch how he coordinated it, and he's very passionate.
Okay, right. Anyway, moving on. So the whole art and culture thing and speech and is of great interest because it shows things that didn't exist before. Okay, so Homo sapiens, controversy about when they evolved. Depends on what you're reading. So there is evidence that Homo sapiens evolved in Africa about 300,000 years ago. Began to spread out from there about 100,000 years ago. Modern humans appeared in southern Africa, so they arose in East Africa, moved down to southern Africa about 200,000 years ago, and there are fossils of Homo sapiens in Ethiopia. This is in South Africa, Classie's River mouth near Humansdorp and in Border Cave in KZN. So if you look at some of the important caves, there's Border Cave. We're going to talk about that. There's Classie's River, there's Blombos. Okay, so there are lots of caves along the coast where early Homo sapiens lived. Okay, large brain, large non-sloping forehead, well-developed frontal lobe, eyebrow ridges small or absent, teeth and face smaller than they've had up until now, and a distinct chin makes space for the tongue to move and enables complex language sounds that would have been possible. Know the implications of all of these. Okay. So in those little caves off of South Africa, again, shell middens, ash, so it shows that they had permanent fires, that they cooked food, and they're important